more.
So I'm Paul Smith. I'll be your instructor for this year. Basically, is the way it works out. I'm currently living in Overland, St. Louis. I spent probably 10 years over in Kansas City before I moved out here for work. I was a software developer for 6-7 years before I started teaching. Been teaching about 2 years now. And before that, we were living over in Switzerland, so I may speak a little bit German, having lived there for 7.5 years. So that's kind of my thing. My general hobby, I do a little bit of game development on the side. I've been known to usually work with Unity, both 2D and 3D art and such. So.
You want to share with us someday?
Yeah, if you want to look at it at some point, I've got my kind of portfolio, my list of games that I've worked on. None of them are really what I would consider finished, unfortunately, but I've got a bunch of them out there. I think that if I go back and look at my projects, there's 10 plus projects of just different things that I've worked on, mostly through game jams, which is get together on a weekend and make something together with a group of 4 or 5. So that's fun. All right, so kind of the agenda for today. We've done the class introduction. Where's my mouse? There it is. So I want to go over the syllabus. We'll talk a little bit about class roles. We'll talk about work ethic. Then we want to kind of get you started with getting your GitHub account set up. We'll have a link for you to get that process started. We want to talk a little bit about separation of concerns. I actually have some slides for that we'll go over. And then we want to go into chapter 1. Okay. At the end of the day, there's homework 1A that's due tomorrow, and that's basically just getting your tools installed, getting your environment set up and run through. So you should be able to start and go through that. You should have a sheet in front of you as far as what's kind of the minimum requirements for your system. I would recommend just taking a look at the specs on your system. If they're lower than that, let me know. There may be some things that we can do to make it run a little bit faster. But if it's lower than that, then you may have some issues as far as with the tools that we're using. So just a fair forewarning. So let's dive into the syllabus here.
Do you post your lectures online?
What do you mean my lectures? As far as
slides?
Oh yeah, so all of this stuff is posted on Inside Rankin.
Awesome.
If you go under most of what we're going to cover today, the lesson plans are right here, syllabus, the first 6 chapters of the book, and then the design principles slides, which I'm going to go over. So all the stuff we cover is right there on the main page. So let's go over the syllabus real quick. So you have my info there about how to get in touch with me. My office is right up 1 floor. I'll be there in the morning. Just get in contact with me and we can arrange if you need anything. I'm usually in between 9 and noon is kind of when I'm in the office. So, program level objectives. I'm sure you've seen those a few times. The text for this semester, this is going to be the textbook. If you haven't gotten it yet, please get it as soon as possible because we'll be covering the first 12 chapters of this in the first 4 weeks is the plan. So, because we're going to do about 3 chapters a week. That being said, your course, the lab load, I'm going to try to keep it a minimum as we're kind of moving through those first 4 weeks. But there's not a whole lot first in the first 6 chapters, and then the next chapters there is just an example project. So we want to we'll build that, and then we'll expand upon the principles and the pieces and the parts of that, and some additional parts that the book doesn't necessarily spend a lot of time on. So we'll go in depth more after that. The first 6 chapters are posted on Inside Rankin, so you can go grab those if you don't have your textbook yet. But obviously, then going into the 3rd week, you'll need your textbook. So that's the one you want to make sure you get is ASP.NET. MVC5. There's a few versions of this which he does reference. We're using just this one, not the platform or the client one's, just the MVC5. Okay, so that's the book you want. The main thing we're going to be talking about, again, as you can see from the test book, we're going to be working with ASP.NET MVC5. Through that process, we're kind of going to be talking about full stack web development is the overall focus. How does that all fit together? How do you fit together the front end stuff that you've learned in first semester, right, with your HTML, your CSS, and your JavaScript, to okay, now we've got C# in the back end, plus kind of in the middle of your front end. And by the way, let's load a database on the back end. So we'll be using SQL Server for that back end when we get there. Just course level outcomes, different things that we hope that you will be able to do by the end of this. Understand the MVC design pattern and separation of concerns. Those are two big things we're going to talk about today, is that design pattern and that separation of concerns. Note that you will have a homework assignment on Wednesday that asks some more in-depth questions about that. We'll also want to look at how do you build web forms. You did see probably some web forms in your first semester, right? Using the form tag and whatnot. But as far as you went, well, okay, I post it. Well, what happens then, right? So that's the big part that we want to get into. Okay, we post it, now let's do something with that. So you submit a form, whether it be a registration form or a contact me form, and make it do some logic from there. So that's another part that we're going to get into. We're also going to look at adding in a database. So using SQL Server, we're going to use Entity Framework as what we call an ORM, and it basically helps us make it easier to travel between the world of SQL, which is what the database is in, and C#. So it gives us some glue to make that process easier. We're also going to talk about JSON, web services, making AJAX calls. I don't know how much of that you saw in your first semester, because I know that textbook is relatively light on AJAX, but we want to spend some more time. In fact, once we get done with those first 12 chapters, that's the next thing I want to hop into is AJAX, because it's kind of an important piece.
Is AJAX what they use in React to write HTML?
No, that's JSX.
Okay.
That's JSX. So AJAX, the whole point of it, stands for asynchronous JavaScript and XML. It's really nowadays it's asynchronous JavaScript and JSON. But the whole point of it is to be able to make your website do things with having to reset and refresh the page, without having to go completely throw everything away, start fresh, go do these things by just sending a small request, getting a small response, and changing the things you need to do in JavaScript.
So that's with async await, those types of tasks and stuff?
We'll talk a little bit about that more. I think chapter 5 mentioned, chapter 5 or 6. No, I think is that chapter 3? I think that's chapter 3 that talks more about that. Async await, there's a version of async await in JavaScript, and there's a version of async await in C#. But the reason we're going to use those is kind of different. The whole point of async code is to say, well, while you're doing this, I'm going to go do this. Right? Or I don't want to wait for you. I'm just going to keep going because I don't want to block the UI, or I want to be able to handle more clients while this thing is happening. So we'll get into some of that. We won't do too much of that on the JavaScript front, but we'll try to kind of incorporate some of those pieces as we go on. Just fair forewarning on that front. You can, in theory, do everything we do this semester without using the words async and await, and the textbook doesn't do too much with them, but it's a very useful thing to know because of some kind of performance constraints. The biggest thing, and again, we'll get to this, if you don't use them, then you can only handle one customer at a time.
Yeah.
So if you build it without them, you're only handling one customer at a time. That's going to make a big difference in performance for your end users.
So I'm sorry to divulge on this one topic.
So,
is that kind of like a form of multi-threading then?
Yes, it is related. It is related. The thing is, you can do asynchronous program without multi-threading, which is weird, but yes, it happens.
Okay.
So it's not exclusive. Node, which is one of the popular technologies out there for building websites, does everything in one thread, even though a lot of things are asynchronous. So those are not necessarily one and the same, multi-threading and asynchronous.
Okay.
You end up with a lot of the similar problems, right? So a problem you might see in multi-threading, you might also see in asynchronous code, but they're not necessarily the same. So we do need to look a little bit about that. And then we're also going to look towards the end of the semester deploying apps to IIS, which is kind of usually where we host ASP.NET applications, is in an IIS setting. Okay. So general policies, these are policies for the IT department. These don't necessarily apply for the rest of the college. So just a heads up on that front. So for the IT department, no streaming videos in class, period. Whether it be YouTube, sports channels, gaming videos, whatever it may be, unless it's specifically for class, right? So if it's related to software development, if it's related to ASP.NET, go for it. But if it's not related to class, I'm going to ask you to shut it down. No video games, whether on a cell phone or on your laptop, please, at any time while you're in the classroom. Doesn't matter. And both of these, let me be clear, this applies even when we're on break. If you want to play a video game or you want to go watch something that isn't class related, take it outside of the class. So even on break, that applies. Cell phones are not allowed, period, put them away, as far as being in the classroom. If you have a call to take, go take it in the hallway. Earbuds are allowed as far as listening to music or listening to videos as far as in-class stuff goes, but no over-the-ear headphones. As far as absences go, so 5 absences, if you get up to 5 absences or more in this 80-day semester, that will go in as an automatic needs improvement for your work ethic grade. So be punctual, be here. There are some cases where we may make exceptions to that rule, whether it be death, court subpoena, religious holidays, sick with a doctor's note, government service. So we may make some exceptions to those rules, but as a general rule, I'd recommend you try to be here. Other parts of dress code. Students need to be wearing dress shoes, no tennis shoes of any sort. We want to make sure, so no tennis shoes. That's the biggest thing there. Students will wear business appropriate dress socks that extend to the calf. Excessive jewelry of any kind is not allowed, and no hooded garments in any of the IT labs or classroom. That'll come in more as we move into the winter months. So if you have a coat or a hoodie or whatever it may be, please take it off before you come into the classroom. Okay. It's okay to wear it on campus, but as soon as you get in the classroom, it needs to be off before you get in the door. Attendance. So for seated class, you can miss up to 6 absences, I believe is the number for this 80-day semester. Past that point, we'll have to dismiss you from the class. That is appealable if you get to that point. If you're over 6, there is an appeal form to fill out, and we'll turn that into Crystal. But hopefully you don't get there. That still puts you at the point. If you're at that point, that's going to still be an automatic needs improvement on your work ethic if we get to that point, even if that's dismissed. Canceled course sessions, holiday sessions don't count towards that. Don't count towards that limit. Do note that arriving late, leaving early, both of those things will count towards tardy or absences. So if the total amount of time that you miss in the class is less than 10 minutes, it will count as a tardy. If it comes up that total is more than 10, it will count as an absence for that day. That does include coming back from breaks, right? So if you're 11 minutes late from class, you're absent for that day. Okay, so if I say, hey, here's the break, come back at 12:15 or 2:15, you need to be back at 12:15. Is that clear? Otherwise, I'm going to mark that as tardy. I usually do scheduled breaks. Do remind me if I forget them, but usually I try to put 3 10-minute breaks, roughly one every hour. Is usually how I split things up. But depending on the day, sometimes we might do a 20 and a 10, depending on where people are at. So, you can make up written tests, hands-on tests. If there is something that comes up where you can't be there on the test day, we can make arrangements to do that before, or we can make arrangements to do that after, but you will have to talk to me so we can make those arrangements. That clear? Ideally, we'll make those ideally, I prefer to have those makeup tests outside of class hours, so that it's not distracting from the class time. But sometimes it does have to be during class time. Academic honesty. This one I want to really, really stress. I have caught people cheating, and I do keep an eye out for it. So don't do it. Don't do it. You know, it's really tempting if you find this really great Stack Overflow answer that does exactly what you want to just copy and paste that and say, oh, I'm done. Don't do that. If you find any code online, you need to go through it and write it again yourself with concepts you understand. If we haven't covered it, if it's a concept we haven't covered in this class, or we didn't cover potentially in the C# class, it may be something that's out of scope. Okay. So just be forewarned on that front. Okay.
So what if we use something that's later in the book and you apply it on the test? Then
so more than likely, if it's later in the book, I have a reason that I don't want you to use it. So usually if it's later in the book, it's a case of I'm trying you to get to understand these tools, because sometimes you have to fall back to an older tool to solve a particular problem. So like Link. Link is a great tool. I definitely advise you to use Link as much as you can. But there are cases where you may need to use a for loop instead, or you may need to use if and else, and you may need to use some of those things so there may be cases where I ask you on the test specifically to use, or on the assignment to use this tool, right? Because I'm trying to get you practice with that tool, if that makes sense. But more likely than not, Link is, as far as this class is concerned, anything you do with a Link function, go for it. Take those Link extension functions and solve the problem, because those are a great tool. So those I'll already say those are out there. Those are free game, you know. But does that kind of make sense? So more often than not, yes, there may be a better tool later in the book, but I want you to see that you prove that you have experience with the other tool, because eventually you're going to need it. If it was something that you'd never use in practice, it'd be something that I'd be ripping out, and I'm not going to cover. But as long as it's something that has some use in real world, I want you to get some practice with it. Okay, so that's the big thing. If you're looking out there for somebody else's code, please do not be copying and pasting code. You know, it's one thing to take their code and say, oh, okay, that's how I can solve this problem, and build it yourself. But if I look at your code and I recognize that it's in a different style than your code, if I can look at it and tell that it's somebody else's code, it's going to be a 0 for that assignment. If it's a clear case of plagiarism, that also means a D&M at the end of the course. Okay, so please do not do that. As far as breakdown of the different assignments, you'll have homework assignments throughout the semester, be roughly 3 homeworks a week, 2 or 3 homeworks a week. Those are generally due the next day. Those are generally assignments that are meant to be done out of class, and they will be due the next day. They're worth 10% of your overall grade. Lab work, that's stuff that's meant to be done in class. You can also do it out of class either way, but that'll be 20% of your grade. Roughly, there should be, usually I'll give out 1 lab assignment a week. And that may have a few different problems on there, but there'll be roughly 1 of those a week. Written tests, those account for 20%. We'll have those every 1 or 2 weeks. This first 4 weeks, we're only going to do a test every 2 weeks, just because of the depth that we're kind of going on the material, if that makes sense. So your first test will be 2 weeks from today, and then the next test, your second test, will be 2 weeks from that. So we'll do those roughly every 1 or 2 weeks. Hands-on tests roughly every 1 or 2 weeks. Hands-on tests are 40%. We'll also have a final project, which is 10% of your grade. Now, the plan for the final project this semester is I do want to do that as a group project. And we'll set up groups when we get there. My plan is to set aside the last 2 weeks for that. I still will be doing some lectures and some material in there, but it will be targeted around, hey, how do you work as a team? And how do you get software deployed, and those kind of things that that relate more to, hey, now you're working as a team, let's talk about some tools to make that work better. So there will still be some material, there'll still be some homework assignments when we get to that point, but that's the gist of it. More than likely it will be to build an e-commerce site as teams. When we set that up, I will have you set up with Trello boards and using Git for that, because Trello is a great tool of managing just the different pieces. And the way I'm kind of thinking about grading that is I'll give everybody the same Trello board of items to do to start with, and then your minimum is going to be everybody needs to complete X number of items on that list to get full credit, if that makes sense. So if there's 15 items on there, or sorry, let's say 20 items and it's a 4-person team, then you'll need to complete 5 of those. Each person on the team will need to complete 5 of those. So that'll be kind of how that works out. So that's 10% of your grade. Grade scale, you can review that on your time. Same thing that it's been. Workload, let's take a quick look here. So rough expectation for the semester is say, okay, at least 80 hours of time reading outside of class. Well, what does that mean? What does that mean? That means at least an hour a day, right? So 80 days in the class means at least spend an hour outside of class reading. That's the expectation of every time we meet. Homework, roughly 20 hours. I don't know that this number is right. It may probably be more than that, just a heads up, especially early on. Lecture, we'll have time in class, exams, lab assignments, and then the final project. I assume at this point everybody knows how to get onto Inside Rankin and use that. I hope so. That's where all your assignments will be. Late work. I do accept late work up to 5 class days late. Every class day it's late, I'll take off 10%. Fair forewarning on that. That starts, that's up until the date it's actually pushed. If it's not on GitHub, it's not been committed and pushed, it's still late, right? So if you're 3 days late pushing it, you committed it locally, but you didn't push it up until 3 days later, that's going to be 30% off that grade. So make sure that when you're pushing things up, commit it, then push it. And I would strongly, strongly recommend that every day you do at least 1 commit and push. Doesn't matter what state your code is in. Doesn't matter if you think it's done or not. Before you leave class, you should for sure have pushed everything that you have on your laptop up to the internet. Because I've seen more than one case where students have gone off and they come back the next day and something happened with their hard drive or something happened with their laptop, and it's gone, right? So everything from your last push is out there on the internet. You need to get a new laptop, we need to pull in a machine, you can pull all that down, right? But if you don't push it, it's not out there. It's only on your machine, right? So we can't get that back. So make sure that every day you're doing a commit and push. And what I would recommend is every time you finish an assignment, whether it be a homework assignment or a labs assignment, definitely for sure push it. If there's 5 problems on the lab assignment, push it after every lab assignment, okay? Because you don't want to lose it and say, oh, well, I'm missing 2 weeks of work. That's a really bad place to be in. There are tutors available through the SCC. I'm not sure who they are currently. Since we're on a new year, we'll probably be recruiting new tutors as we go through this semester, since some of the old ones have graduated. But there are tutors available through the SCC. Let me know if you, or get in contact with them if you should need assistance. So there are tutors for AWD, or at least we'll work on getting them. Students with disabilities, if you have any accommodations, I know the talk to the SSE, they'll send me an email and let me know what those are, and then we'll kind of take care of those things in private as need be. Career services are available. Please stay in touch with them throughout this year. You know, you definitely want to be in touch with employers, especially through job fairs and things like that. I think of my 10 students that graduated this past year, 6 of them already have a job. 3 of those had a job. 3 or 4 of those had a job before they graduated. And I would definitely shoot for that if you have the opportunity. Snow days, emergency services. Who here is signed up for OmniAlert?
Do we have to re-sign up?
Yes, you do.
Oh.
You have to sign up every year. So if you haven't done it yet, you definitely go back in and sign up for those alerts again, because that's how we'll set out, hey, there's a snow day or there's other things happening. Around campus. So definitely make sure you're signed up for that. Unless there is a notification out there through the OmniAlert system, assume that class will be held. Just because other schools are closing down because of snow days doesn't necessarily mean that we're having a snow day. So, fair forewarning.
Yeah, I see it.
Yeah. Yeah. So talking about work ethic and how that's going to be graded, if you go under your courses, you should have 2 courses listed here. One for the course and one for your work ethic grade. So it should be WG AW12. If you look under there, there's 3 different attachments, 3 different handouts I put out there. So the first one here is going to be this work ethic grade sheet, which is the one we'll be using this semester. And is broken out by the 5 different categories. So the way this one grades, it's on a 0 to 15 scale, and that will kind of give you what your grade is. So 0 to 3 is going to be a D&M, NIM is going to be 4 to 8, meets is going to be 9 to 12, exceed is going to be 13 to 15. I am planning to give you these sheets on a 2-week basis. So every 10 days roughly, I want to sit down and go over any issues, where you're at work ethic wise. That is the plan. So roughly every 10 days we'll call all of you out here one by one and we'll kind of talk about where you stand. So we want to do that. That means we'll be doing that roughly 8 times through the semester. Your final grade will be that 8th grade. Or actually, no, it averages. So it will be the average of the 8. Sorry, it won't be the last one, it'll be the average. So that's where that fills out. So looking at those different categories, one question, exhibits pride and performance. What might be an exceeds on that front? A common case there is going to be going over and above with your programs, right? If your program is the bare minimum, hey, it has either from having lots of bugs, if your programs routinely have a lot of bugs, that's going to be a 1 or a 0, right, on that front. If I keep seeing, if on the other side, if I keep seeing your code is relatively bug-free, you've added things to it in addition to what I asked for, that's going to be a case of an exceeds on that front. Okay, so that's what I'm looking for there, is the quality of your code more than anything. Demonstrates ability to get along with others. That's going to be how you interact with me, how you interact with your fellow students in class. You know, preferably getting along, preferably not using a loud volume to your voice, if that makes sense. Keeping discussions related to class. Positive attitude. I'm really looking for people not to get discouraged on that front. A good sign on that is you're keeping and trying, hey, there's going to be some things that you run into and they're going to be hard and they're going to take you time to fix, but keep working at it. So that's one of the big thing I'm looking for there. Respect for workplace structure. That is going to be somewhat how you interact with me, but more likely the main thing there is the dress code. Dress code violations and things like that would fall in there. So if you're all good, appearance-wise, that's the biggest thing, as well as tardies and absences, right? You know, make sure that you're here on time, especially if you're here at least 5 minutes early. That's a big plus on that front. One note on that front. So, mentioned tardies and tardies is up to 10 minutes, both getting here late, but also meaning leaving early. Okay, if you're packed up and ready to go, your laptop's shut, you're not working on anything, you're effectively not here. Okay, so the expectation is don't pack up your laptop and stop working until, when does the class end? 4:25. Okay. Other than that, if you're packing up before 4:25, that is a tardy. So whatever you need to do, if you're done with all the work, that means I expect you to be working ahead, looking out there for videos, looking out for additional information about the topic that we're covering. There's always a lot more information out there than we are able to get to. So there should always be something for you to improve on, something to work on further. Even if it ends up being that you're working on a personal project. I'd rather see you here working on a personal project till 4:25 than twiddling your thumbs and talking to your classmates about Fortnite. Honesty, big thing there is going to be cheating. You know, as long as you're not cheating, that's pretty much a meet. So.
Is there a way to get an exceed somehow? I mean,
I've never given out an exceeds on honesty.
so 15 on this whole thing is theoretically possible.
Theoretically possible. The reality is it's going to be probably 14 because you'd have to really go up above and beyond about something special for that to be a case. right?
Yeah.
I don't know where that happens, where that would happen. Because my baseline assumption is that you're not lying about anything. And if you're lying about something, that's going to be a 0. So that's the rubric that's out there. I haven't printed those out. I'll print them out as we need them, because you'll have a few of those sheets by the end of the semester. Any questions on that for the rubric? Does that make sense? Dress code. Do you want to review the dress code? Things do change over time with the student handbook, so I would recommend kind of reading up on it. As I've heard, the student handbook has changed. I don't remember if it changed this past year, but there has been some changes in terms of hair and the like.
Has
So
been better or worse from our perspective?
less strict. The rules have been a little bit less strict. As far as I see, I don't see anybody in violation right now as far as hair goes, which is good.
What is it like? It's your shoulders or whatever?
So it does have to be above the shoulders. It does have to be, the big thing is take a shower and groom it, comb it every day.
That's, wow.
You know, if you're going a whole week without, you're going without a whole week without showering or without combing it, and it looks oily and disheveled, you know, probably gonna have to have a talk.
You got problems outside of class at that point, though. You got bigger problems than just breaking this.
Yeah. So, but as long as you're following daily grooming material, you should be fine. One important to note, everybody here, if you're clean shaven right now, you need to stay clean shaven. Period. That's it. It starts now. Whatever your starting point right now is, if you're clean shaven, you need to stay clean shaven. You two that have facial hair, that's fine. Just keep it trimmed. If at any point you choose to shave your facial hair, it needs to stay shaven for the rest of the semester. That's basically what you need to know about that. So you can't grow a beard in the middle of the semester. You can shave it off if you want, but you can't grow one in the middle of the semester. Save that for in between semesters. Hair, earrings, clean trim, neatly groomed. Yeah. Hats and caps, those are where we'll be heading into winter months. Those are fine. Just please take them off when you get into class. That's it. No body piercings. So those are the big things. T-shirt, shirts. Remember, you need to have your rank and logo. For the IT department, nothing with hoods. Under any circumstance. I know that they have some hooded garments down in the bookstore. Those are still off limits. So if it doesn't have a hood, you're fine. Yours doesn't have a hood, you're fine. But if it does have a hood, it's off limits. Pants, basically just dress slacks, dockers and the like. That's all good. Dress shoes, no tennis shoes. You do need to make sure you have a belt. Your belt is part of the dress code, as well as your badge. Your badge having your badge on is part of the dress code as well. That's basically what we need to look at there. Any questions? Remember that the dress code does apply as long as you're on campus. So even if you're in the halls, the dress code, or at the cafeteria, dress code does apply. Okay, so if I catch you in the cafeteria, your shirt untucked, or you're out of dress code, we're still going to talk about that. So please stay in dress code as long as you're on campus. Any questions there? I think the next thing on my agenda, talk about dress code. Let's get GitHub set up. So if you go back to the course, You're going to scroll down to links. You should see something here, GitHub Classroom, all coursework. Please click on that link. It should take you to a list of names. Your name should be on there. Clicking on that name will get you set up. You may have to sign in. With the sign in.
It can be our own.
If you have a personal account, all you need to do is add your rank and email to it.
But if you have more than one email?
Yeah, so GitHub will let you have more than one email on your account. So go ahead and start with that one, and then you can just add your, if you have one already, start with that, add your student email to it.
I clicked it, says AWD account.
Okay. So yours is, your class is correct, your repo's already created. It looks like you already completed the process.
Is this a mistake?
I think that might have been a misclick, but either way, it should be set up. I think what happened in your part is I was showing Evan about how to do it, and you don't done this stuff, so you might have a great repo. So you should be fine. So I had one from that, so is there one right there?
Yeah. Yeah, you have to want to use that and add your rank.
Are you guys not using Bitbucket?
Not this year. I talked about that before you came in. One of the big things that's happened is the reason that we were using Bitbucket was because it allowed us to have free private repos, and that wasn't an option on GitHub. But GitHub's changed their rules on that, so private repos are fine. Are free. So this is why we're switching. Plus this GitHub Classroom tool.
Yeah.
There's definitely more industry backing, industry tendency towards GitHub, so I'd rather have it on there.
Yeah.
Where do I add my name?
Through Microsoft, I assume.
But that rule actually changed to what's right in the first.
Pretty sure you gotta confirm.
First name, last for last name. Yeah. I know, but I think yeah, that sounds right. Yeah, there is. So what should we do? Once you confirm your rank and press change that now to verify it. So you should have an email already sent to you. Verify it. And then you just want to change that. That's like you're saying. I would recommend just using rank.eda directly. Let's see where everybody's at. Okay.
So Scott Norton and Eston, we're still waiting on you to make your repositories.
So go back and edit. So go here. So you still need to update your name.
Still hasn't. So you haven't joined. You can go back to the link and click on the link again. Back to the link on the site.
Because it hasn't loaded yet.
Um, oh, there we go. Okay. All right. So we got most of everybody. I think Essen, you're still working on yours, but I think everybody else is hooked up. So you should now, if you go back to GitHub, we can go over to your repositories, and I think I have, where did it go? I pulled it down today. Maybe I didn't follow my own link. Okay, yeah. So you should have a repo that looks like this now. There's a link up here that says clone or download. You drop that down. Here's the URL that you need. So if you click the button to copy paste the URL here, you can then go clone. So I'm going to copy this URL. I'm going to right click on my desktop. Assuming you have Tortoise Git installed, you should be able to go to git clone.
Wait, does it have to be on the desktop?
It doesn't have to be on the desktop. You can put it wherever you want. But right clicking anywhere should give you that clone option. It should have the URL already in here, and just hit OK. So that's going to pull down that repository. This is going to be a repository for most things this semester, with the exception of the final project. So everything except the final project will go in here. So you already have a folder for examples, a folder for homework, labs, tests, the textbook. That should already be there. The biggest thing that's important there is this git ignore file should already be there. If we look at what's in there, who remembers what this git ignore file is for?
ignore some files that you don't want pushed up to the GitHub.
Right. Why is that important? Why is that important that we don't push certain files up to the server?
Because there might be some files that have like just like stuff you don't want, like passwords or something.
Or like conflicting files.
Yeah.
So there's a few different reasons.
Well,
Or just
So
junk.
one reason is, yes, it may be something that's private data. Another reason is it may be files that are different from developer to developer. So say you have 5 developers on your team. They may have some settings that says, where is that folder on their computer? Right? Well, you don't need to share those. Those are going to be different for everybody on your team. You don't want to share those because otherwise you're going to run into issues. The other thing is, some of these files are big. Some of these files take up a lot of space, and that means there's a lot of downloading and uploading that has to happen, which isn't necessary because you can just hit rebuild in Visual Studio and it'll be there. So a lot of these files are what we would call temporary files. Visual Studio is going to go ahead and create them for them as it needs them, but it doesn't matter whether or not the other developers have them because they can just get them. The biggest one in there, am I looking at the right file? One of the biggest ones in there is the .vs folder. There's a lot usually in that .vs folder. A lot of temporary files. We definitely don't want to upload that one. The other, when I'm not seeing it in here, so we may need to actually add it. The other big one is NuGet packages. So let me just make sure that I'm looking at this right one. Okay, so there is something actually missing from here that we'll need to add. So if you have Notepad++ installed, please open that file and go grab the thing that we need to add to that. I pulled down, oh, I do not have it yet. Oh, no, I think I moved that to my desktop. There it is. I knew I'd already pulled it down. And I could swear I put that in there. But apparently I didn't. Let's fix that. So I apparently pulled the one that we were using for first semester and put it in there rather than the one we needed for this semester. So I'm going to go ahead and just make a change to this and I'll share it out.
Should we pull it?
You won't be able to pull it because what it's done is it's forked it. So your repo is what we call forked off of my repo. So I can push it out to my own repo, but you guys won't get those changes. So let me go ahead and commit that. Okay. That's been committed up. If I go to inside Rankin, And I'm just going to add that as a handout here. Choose file, desktop. Why?
Yeah, I don't know.
Why is it usually like open product and so
Yeah, it's, honestly. It's on 60.
What in the world? Why am I not?
No, it's HBO.
So I created a TXT file, and it's not showing it up for upload. That is weird. Am I in the right place? I am.
Maybe you need to make a docx.
A dot what?
For like Microsoft Word. I don't think I've uploaded anything inside or anything except for
Yeah.
docx. And then that was
Dot what?
docx. That's like a
Yeah.
Microsoft Word extension.
But I don't want formatting in there.
Right? Yeah.
Yeah, rich text, or rich text, back to plain text. Not great.
Also, even if they're, you know, so the select option, it said all files, so it shouldn't matter what
Yeah.
Yeah.
extensions.
It should be visible. But it's not seeing it there. Okay, well, I may have to give that to you tomorrow then with the updates. I guess I do know if I go here, this one, oh, I know what's up. I know what's up. I'm looking in the wrong folder. I'm looking at base coursework, but I threw it over here.
Yeah.
There it is. Which also means I committed it to the wrong place. All right.
Gonna edit that out in post.
Yeah. That's what happens. I was like, I'm looking in the right folder. Why is it not there? And I was, of course, looking in the wrong folder. I'm going to delete that folder so I don't make that mistake again. Okay, problem solved. So there should be an updated ignore file on the main page. You'll want to pull down the contents of that and just copy paste it into what you already have. The important line of that, of what you have here, is going to be this packages part. Ignore the packages folder, because that's where all the NuGet packages get downloaded to, which is fairly heavy one too. So that's the important one in there, in addition to the few other folders that are there.
So then we would commit and push it from ours.
Yes.
Oh, yeah, I don't need to
Alright, so we are active. I thought I fixed that as far as when I was setting these up, but apparently I did not.
What did you go over?
Biggest thing is that section that I highlighted, filter results, which is probably everything. Because there's a few more things in there.
Should we just push this out real quick?
Yeah, push it out there. So you don't lose it. If you uninstall Tortoisegate, you may well need to reboot your machine to install it again. Okay, so that's getting your repo set up. So that's the repo that you're going to use for your homework. That's the repo you're going to use your lab for work. All your hands-on tests I'm going to expect you to put in there. So there's a test folder, there's a labs folder, there's a homework folder. Just put them in the appropriate folder. There should be a bunch of folders already in fact created for you for the different assignments. So if we look at homework, you'll see there's a folder for each unit. If we look at labs, you should see there's a folder for each unit there as well. Tests, there's going to be a folder for each unit. So you'll just want to create them according to wherever we are. So this first 2 weeks, this is going to be unit 1. Any questions on that? Okay. All right, so that's that. Let's go back to here. What's next on our agenda? So the next thing on my agenda is we'll look at separation of concerns. So if you go back to the main page, you should see that there's a link here, Design Principles. You're going to pull that down if you want to follow along. So, general design principles. Two things we want to talk about is separation concerns, and we'll talk a little bit about model view controller and how that fits into what we're going to do. There'll be more about this, and there'll be more about model view controller as soon as we get into chapter 1. So some of this will be kind of, you'll see it more than once. But separation of concerns is a very useful little principle out there, but the book doesn't really talk about it. It kind of assumes that you know about it. Okay. Is anybody familiar with that term?
Model view controller?
Separation of concerns. Okay. Which is why I figured most of you probably will not have heard that term yet. So let's talk about it. So where it comes from is something called SOLID. Solid principles. Solid principles is a group of 5 principles. They're originally put together by Mr. Robert Martin. Okay, so he wrote a book. this one, clean code, about the solid principles and how to bring them together. All 5 of those were originally written by different authors, but he brought those together, popularized them, and said, "Hey, you know, you should write your software this way because it's going to make it more maintainable." Okay, so SOLID's an acronym. Guess what the first S stands for?
Separation.
Separation of concerns. So the first one is the one that we want to talk about here. These are not hard and fast rules. These are guidelines. These are guidelines to build better software. The whole goal is to build software that's not like a Jenga tower, where we change one thing and everything falls apart, or there's like, I changed something here and something over here stops working, right? That's what this is all about. Can you write software any way you want? Sure. But it's better to follow some guidelines, right? It's better in the long term to follow these guidelines. One of the reasons that I bring this up is because MVC is a working out of that. It's one way to break up the software. Is it the best way to break up the software? That's up for debate. But it is the way that we'll be breaking up software this semester. So, separate concerns. The meme out there gives a good kind of intro to what? What does it say down here? Don't let your plumbing code pollute your software. If you look at the picture, notice we got a refrigerator here. Notice there's a lot of things there that don't belong.
Maybe not in your fridge.
Right? Well, do you want to put bleach in your fridge and potentially get your food contaminated with bleach? I don't.
Maybe there's
Or toilet bowl cleaner.
fridge
You
that
don't
I
want your water in there either. You don't want your water in the refrigerator. Yeah,
So,
that's crazy.
having some basic like, hey, this kind of code goes here, and this kind of code goes here, and that kind of code goes there. You have to have some order at least, because otherwise it's just chaos. So the common way that you'll see people break up their logic is a 3-tier system like this. You take your presentation logic or your UI logic, the stuff that you use for displaying data to the user and formatting it, making it look pretty, changing the colors, making buttons disabled, enabled, changing the focus of where things are. All of those things are considered presentation logic. When the part that's directly connected to the user, that is your presentation logic. Okay. One of the big things that people miss in there is, let's say I want to take a number, right? And I want to format it as currency. That is presentation logic. Doing formatting as currency, doing as formatting as 3 decimal, 2 decimal places, that is presentation logic. Okay? So you want to keep that in this, what we call the presentation layer, right? That's actually really important. Okay? If you're doing formatting out numbers, make sure that that's on the presentation side. Never do that on any of these other layers. You don't want to do formatting on those 2 other layers. Same thing with dates. If you're going to format a date for the user, keep that on the presentation side, right? Because some countries it may be year, month, day. Some countries it may be day, month, year, or year, month, day. All of those exist, and you want to keep the rest of your code not having any knowledge of that mess. So we've got presentation logic on the front. In the middle, we have something called business logic. What is business logic?
Does it have anything to do with logic? Like
With what?
logic, conditionals, like biconditionals?
Right, so if-else statements, switch statements, that would be logic. Even loops, logic, right? So, but this logic, all 3 of these layers contain logic. This is logic about what?
I guess how the application runs. And so, like, my question was like, is that kind of like the front end, the database is the database, and the business logic is sort of like the back end server side?
So this is front end, and this is back end.
And that's
this
like
is somewhere in
the
between.
middle end.
This
connects
is
the
usually
two.
considered back-end though.
Yeah.
Business
Yeah.
logic is usually considered back-end.
Is that what the C# in the back end would kind of be like?
Yes.
Okay.
So our
that-
C# is actually going to be kind of mostly contained to those 2 layers. We
Okay.
will actually have some C# up here. So we're going to keep our C# up here to the minimum. It's better to do, you're going to see a lot of HTML, CSS, and JavaScript up on this layer. You won't see any HTML, CSS, or JavaScript on these layers.
Okay, so the database is just the SQL stuff, and
Yeah.
so
So SQL is entirely contained here, HTML is entirely contained to there, C# is kind of the go-between between
So-
all of this.
in MVC terms, view, model, and then controller in the middle.
We'll come back to that.
Okay.
You're close. Yeah, I think you're pretty close to it. My question's still here, business logic, what do I mean by that?
Like what the application's going to do, how to get to that point?
Close, yes. Who designs these requirements?
Business.
The business, right? That's the most important thing. The stuff that goes in here, that's the information that your client is giving you. Okay? That comes from the business, right? So if they're telling you that if you put in this voucher code, it's 20% off your order, that's business logic. If they're telling you you can't buy more than 30 pairs of socks, that's business logic,
So
right?
specific to that particular
Mhm.
business.
Or you have to, your minimum order size is 25 bucks. That's all business logic. So business logic is going to be specific to the company you're working with, very specific to the company you're working with and what your program needs to do, right? So that's where the business rules go. Okay? And that's where most of our logic actually will end up. Most of our code will end up being business logic. Okay. Then at the bottom level, we have what we call the data access layer. Okay. That's what works with saving the data to files or to a database, right? So on this back end, it may be a database. It might be SQL Server, which is what we're going to use this semester. It could be SQLite. It could be MongoDB. It could be CouchDB. It could be any of those, right? Or it could even be just, I'm writing to some files, right? I could be writing to some files in a game, right? This is where your save games go, right? At some point you have to save your high score, or you have to say where all the items are in the world. Well, that's in the data access layer. Okay, so we're going to break that up in these 3 layers. How do we save the data? How do we manipulate the data? Who can see the data, right? Maybe one person can see this piece of information and another person can't. That'd be in the business layer. And then how we make it look, how we present it to the user is going to be up in this presentation layer. So this is the usual way that we break this up. And we're going to basically go with this roughly as you hint and as you correctly guessed for the MVC architecture. This is still a very good way to break up your code if you're writing Windows forms. If you're writing desktop apps or mobile apps, you should still break up your code this way. It's still a good idea. Doesn't matter what application you're writing, this is generally a good way to section up your code. Now, the reason that we break that up, we talked about separation concerns. So separation concerns, formal definition of this, is a design principle for separating computer programs into distinct parts such that each part addresses a separate concern. Now, what do I mean by part? There's a reason I'm not using a technical term there, right? Oftentimes that means classes. Oftentimes what I mean by part is a class. So a class is only concerned with one concern. It only governs one concern. That's usually what we want. But sometimes a part is actually a group of classes. Sometimes you will need a group of classes that specifically solve this problem, okay? Now, let me define a concern a second here. A concern is the way we define that is it's a reason for changing the software, okay? A concern is a reason for changing the software, right? So, how does this help us with separation of concerns? If I say, let's break this up, what are reasons for changing the presentation logic? What's a reason for changing the presentation logic?
Maybe the client wants updated art onto their front
Maybe
end.
they want some new images?
If the data changes and they update something, you need view to reflect those changes, right?
No, that's not, because the data changes, where's the data live? The data lives down here.
What I'm saying, like your account balance or
What would change the presentation logic, though? The only thing on the presentation that covers in the
Oh, it's
data
like-
logic is how I'm displaying the account information.
something. Oh, so not what you were explaining, just explain.
Yes,
Alright.
because what I'm saving, right? If the data if the data that I'm storing changes, it's a change down here. If how I'm presenting it to the user, it's a change up here.
Not what you're presenting, it's how.
Gonna say localizing the site for different countries could require a change in the logic.
Right. So if I'm trying to get this thing to work in German or French or Spanish, ideally the only thing I want to touch is the presentation logic. Right? So anything that deals with the front end and just the front end, I want to separate those concerns into classes that just deal with the front end. So I don't have to change, I don't want to have to change how I calculate the total of my shopping cart or how I calculate discount codes just because I'm trying to make this work in Mexico. Right? My 20% discount code shouldn't matter whether or not it's in French or Spanish or German or English. There's no difference. 20% off, right? So I want to keep those kind of logic down here, right? So front end, that's front end changes, whether you're saying, hey, I want in a different language, different country, I want commas for every thousands digit, right? Those things would be presentation logic. I want to see 3 decimal places or 2 decimal places, or I want to round the closest integer. All of those things are front end, right? So I'm going to split those off. Business logic. So what might change on the business logic?
Well, like you're saying with coupons, if it expires,
Well, or maybe there's a new coupon.
or yeah, so you have new
Or-
coupons and that
Right.
coupon's no longer valid.
Maybe,
Or-
maybe
Don't make that work anymore.
Maybe I need a new, maybe all I put in there is orders that say you use this coupon, you get X% off. Well, now I need a new coupon that gives me buy one, get one free. Or buy 3, get one free,
Or if
right? That should be a change to the business logic. It shouldn't affect anything else, right? Ideally, I want both the data and the presentation to survive that change. So I only have to touch one layer.
Also, would like changes to taxes be a change in business logic?
Right, taxes would also be in business logic. So ideally, I want to keep I want to have, okay, the presentation logic doesn't know that taxes are different in Mexico.
Yeah, because
What about privacy stuff, like how a business might use your information?
So privacy is generally going to land in the business layer. Privacy and security, those issues usually land in the business layer.
When you're converting currency, like because like 1
Yeah.
euro does not equal 1.
Right.
dollar. Would that be business? Because
It depends.
yeah. So
That depends. That depends. Because here's the problem.
Yeah.
So-
You're buying something.
You're buying something.
Yeah.
So am I presenting it differently to the user? Maybe. Probably. I probably have to, if I'm selling it in euros, I probably have to put a euro symbol instead of a dollar symbol.
You need a conversion.
But I also probably do have to do a currency conversion.
'Cause, yeah,
So
otherwise-
usually the currency conversion would usually be in business logic, but the display, putting the euro or the dollar symbol would be up here.
So is that something you have to do both for?
Yes. So that would be something that crosses those layers. So this abstraction is not perfect. There are cases where, unfortunately, concerns do cross multiple layers, but our goal by doing this is to limit how many different places we have to touch when we make new features. That's the goal. Okay? It doesn't always work. For better or for worse, it doesn't always work that way. If I'm adding a brand new thing, it may be that I have to add something, all 3 of those, and we usually do. So the other way to break things up is by feature. You know, say, hey, the shopping cart, and here's the list of items that we have in the store, and here's our inventory system. So that's the other way to break things up and separate things, is to separate and vertically that based on feature. And that usually ends up actually working a little bit better when it comes to keeping changes isolated to, it's a lot easier to keep changes isolated to a feature than necessarily a layer. But we want to try as much as we can. So does that make sense? A concern is a reason for changing. And usually that means a person. Usually it's because somebody told you to do it differently, right? It's not always, but it's usually started with somebody changed their requirements on it or added it in. So ideally what that means, we want to say every class should only have one reason to change. There should only be one reason for changing that class element. More specifically, there should only be one person, right? So let's say you have a change coming from the finance office, right? From your chief financial officer. Which layer are they probably going to tell you to change? Business. And ideally, all of your changes that they ask you to make should just be in the business layer. Let's say you've got your database administrator, and he says, well, if we add this index or whatever, we change the structure of your data, it will run a lot faster and we'll be able to serve 10 times as many customers. Well, which layer should you have to change for him? The data layer, right? Because he's saying, okay, we can make this faster if we change the data, right? We don't want to have to change the presentation layer because the database administrator said, do this to make the database faster, right? So those kind of things. So if we've got, hey, changes to wages, bonuses, those would be business logic. If we have things about how a report is filtered, searched, those kind of things, it would be, your presentation logic. We want to keep those separate, so we only have to change one layer. Here's a really good video. So let's go walk. Actually, before we do that, let's go ahead and we're at 2 o'clock. So let's go ahead and take a 10-minute break, and we'll come back, or a little bit more than 10. Come back at 2:15. Come back at 2:15, and we'll kind of watch through the first 10 minutes of this.